All right, let's talk about the economy. Because at its heart, it's really just this giant, nonstop tug of war. A constant battle between two really powerful opposing ideas, freedom and control. We're going to jump right in.
Everything really boils down to these three simple questions. And the only reason we even have to ask them is because of one basic, unavoidable fact of life: scarcity. We just can't have everything we want. So every single society, whether it's a tiny village or a global superpower, has to make choices. Are we going to build more hospitals, or are we building more railways? Do we use robots or people to make our stuff? And maybe the biggest question of all, who gets to enjoy all the cool things we make? How we answer these questions, well, that defines our entire economic system. And that leads us right to the two teams in this economic tug of war. On one end of the rope, you've got the invisible hand, the free market, which basically says, hey, let individuals and businesses figure it out. On the other end, you've got the visible hand of the government, pulling back and saying, whoa, not so fast. We need to step in and guide things. This is the central fight we're going to unpack today. So first up, let's look at Team Free Market. The whole idea here is pretty wild when you think about it. It's the belief that millions of individual decisions, all made by people just looking out for themselves, can somehow magically organize an entire economy without anyone actually being in charge. So how on earth does that work? Well, it all starts with two key forces. The first force is demand, and that's us, all of us, the consumers. The law of demand is super intuitive, right? It just says that when the price of something goes down, we usually want to buy more of it. And when the price goes up, yeah, we buy less. Simple enough. But this relationship sends a really powerful signal out into the world about what we value. And the second force, that's supply. This is the other side of the coin, the producers. For them, the logic is flipped. When they can sell something for a higher price, they've got a way bigger incentive to make more of it. I mean, it's all about profits. So as prices go up, the amount they're willing to make and sell goes up too. Okay, and this is where the magic happens. It's when these two forces, supply and demand, meet. The sweet spot where the amount we consumers want to buy perfectly matches the amount producers want to sell, that's called equilibrium. It creates what's known as the market clearing price, where everyone's happy and resources are allocated super efficiently, all without a single person telling them what to do. It's the market's natural balancing act. So does this actually work in the real world? Oh, absolutely. Think back to when all the lockdowns started. Suddenly, everyone needed a home office, and the demand for desks just exploded. What happened? Prices shot through the roof, and that high price was like a giant neon sign for producers, basically screaming, hey, stop what you're doing and start making desks, now. And just like that, resources, we're talking wood, labor, factory space, were all redirected. That right there, that's the invisible hand at work. But, and this is a big but, that invisible hand isn't always perfect. Sometimes, if you just leave the market completely to its own devices, it can lead to some really, really bad outcomes for society as a whole. And this is where the other side of the story kicks in.
Economists have a name for this: market failure. It's what happens when everyone pursuing their own self-interest ends up with a result that's actually inefficient or even harmful for the rest of us. The market might be making way too much of a bad thing, or nowhere near enough of a good thing. So what does this market failure stuff actually look like? Well, it can show up in a few different ways. You might see the market overproducing things that are bad for us, what they call derit goods. It can also completely ignore external costs. Think of a factory polluting a river and not having to pay a dime for the cleanup. At the same time, it can seriously underproduce things we all benefit from, like education or healthcare. And of course, it can lead to giant monopolies that can charge whatever they want. This quote from our source material just hits the nail on the head. A free market might be incredibly efficient at making and selling cigarettes to maximize profit, right? But from society's perspective, that's a huge over-allocation of resources to something that's incredibly damaging. The key point here is the market just doesn't see that social cost. It's a blind spot. And that is the exact moment the other team in our tug of war decides to step onto the field. To fix these market failures, the government brings out its visible hand, a whole toolkit full of policies designed to nudge or sometimes shove the economy in a better direction. Okay, so what's in this government toolkit? Well, it kind of breaks down into three main categories. First up, you've got fiscal policy. This is what politicians do with spending and taxes to try and manage economic growth. Then there's monetary policy, which is usually handled by a central bank. They use tools like interest rates to keep things stable and fight inflation. And finally, you've got supply-side policies. These are the long-game investments, like education or infrastructure, meant to boost the whole economy's potential down the road. So let's see how this would work in the real world. Say the government identifies a problem. There's way too much pollution coming from factories. That's an external cost. So they go to their toolkit and they pull out a fiscal policy tool, a tax. They slap a tax on the polluting product. All of a sudden, it's more expensive for the company to produce it. So what do? They make less of it. And the result? Less pollution. The visible hand just stepped in and corrected the market's blind spot. So on one side, we have the efficient, innovative, but sometimes flawed free market. And on the other, we have the corrective, but sometimes clumsy hand of government. This isn't really about one side winning the tug of war. It's about finding that perfect point of tension, that right balance in the middle. This slide really lays it all out, doesn't it? The free market is amazing for efficiency, for innovation, for giving us choices. But the downsides are real: massive inequality, environmental damage. On the other hand, government intervention can fix those problems and promote fairness. But it can also be slow, inefficient, and sometimes mess up the very market signals that create wealth in the first place. It's a classic trade-off. So what's the solution to this constant tug of war? Well, it's the mixed economy. And honestly, this is what pretty much every country in the world actually has. It's not a clear choice between pure hands-off capitalism or total government control. It's a system that tries to get the best of both worlds, to harness the incredible power of the market while using the government to sand off its roughest edges. And this right here, this is probably the biggest takeaway of this whole explainer. The real modern economic debate isn't about the free market versus the government. It's about where we draw the line between them. This is the argument you hear every day. Should we have more government spending or less regulation? The fight isn't about which system to use, but about the degree of intervention. You see, that perfect balance, it's not some fixed point. It's always shifting, with new technology, with changing values in society, with global crises. Which leaves us with the final and maybe most important question. In this never-ending tug of war between freedom and control, who actually gets to decide where that line is drawn?